Okay, so basically, I'm going to go over how my anxiety started. Um, it's actually been about 5 or 6 years now. Um, my first panic attack was actually pretty bad. I'd never experienced anything like it before, so it definitely caught me off guard. Um, Basically, what was going on is me and a couple friends were going to an anime convention, and it's actually in Baltimore, Virginia. Um, so we were going in to the convention and we were renting a hotel. Now, this was actually my first time going there as far as being in a hotel. And we were probably on about the 17th floor. Now, what ended up happening was we went up in the hotel. We got there. It was pretty cool. I was pretty excited. Before this, I really didn't have much anxiety at all, really. Um, so we get there in the hotel, and I'm excited. I can't wait to go to the actual convention center. And we were just kind of hanging out and stuff like that. Um, and then all of a sudden, I realized it was getting later, and we weren't going to really have any time to go to the convention because we had arrived too late. So what we ended up doing was we went in back to the hotel room and we played some games on the TV. Um, Before I knew, I went to go take my medication. Actually, my medication was for depression. So I went to go take my medication, and I asked my girlfriend at the time to go get me a meatball sub down in the lobby. So she brings me the sub up, and I take a bite of the sub with my medicine because it says you're supposed to eat food with the medicine. And what I realized is all of a sudden I wasn't feeling so well. So I said, I sat down, started playing the game a little bit to try and get my mind at ease because it just felt wrong. I really don't know how to describe it. Just kind of not at ease, a little bit of anxiousness for no reason really. Um, and I say maybe 5 minutes into the game, it just went. My vision just blurred out. I really couldn't see it. I felt like I was completely dizzy and I was gonna faint, which I'd never actually experienced before. So it was really scary. Um, and so I start freaking out, and then I realize my head is just. I feel like my head's gonna explode, and it's just like so. I grab my head. I grab my head and um, kind of start freaking out, much more freaking out, panic, a lot of panic, and all my friends were there. I mean, I had 6 or 7 friends around me, and they're like, what's going on, guy? What's wrong, dude? Are you all right? And I was like, I couldn't say anything. I was paralyzed basically, and I'm on the floor, at this point, and I couldn't breathe. I felt like I was dying. I was on the floor. I felt like I was having convulsions. I was having a heart attack. That I was going to die. That it was a sure thing I was going to die. Um, and really, I mean, it didn't last too long. It lasted for about 5 minutes actually, which seemed forever to me, even though it wasn't really that long. Um, and while it was going on, I'm looking up at my friends from the floor, and they're just all looking down at me like, whoa, 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 what's going on? Like I was weird or I had some problem, and basically after that had happened, I was really scared, terrified actually. I think this is when I was 17, 16, 17, and it was the first time it had ever happened to me. And I was still in school at this time, and I was thinking, how am I ever going to go to school again? It was an immediate thing. I knew that it was going to be an issue because I've always had, a little bit of depression and stress, definitely stress, but nothing ever this severe. So I called my mom after the panic attack had passed. I called my mom and told my mom what had happened, and she's like, you need to call the doctors. You need to call your doctor as soon as you get the chance. Well, it was the weekend, so I really couldn't call the doctor, and I, was freaking out a little bit more about that because I'm thinking, what if I'm dying? I can't call the doctor. How am I going to find out what's wrong with me? But everything actually seemed to be a little bit better after my panic attack. Just the weekend, a couple of hours afterwards, it wasn't so bad. And by the time it was, the next day, I was so afraid to go to the convention center because of my first panic attack. I thought I was going to go out there and it was going to be too hot and I was just going to faint and pass out and die. It really had me completely terrified. My girlfriend didn't understand it. I told her, I was like, I don't know what's going on with me. I'm really freaking out. And um, she kind of looked at me like, well, I don't know what to do. What do you want me to do? And at that point, I felt very alone. Um, But I called with the doctors when it was, when it was, I think it was Monday. I called the doctor and was like, what's going on? I've taken this medication, and it put me into a panic attack, or it put me into some sort of attack. I didn't say panic attack because I actually didn't know what it was at the time. Um, but I was just like, I felt like I was dying, and they said you probably had a panic attack, and they were like, could you breathe? I was like, no, absolutely not. I was on the floor, and it was really bad. And what they told me was that it might have been a reaction from the medication and the fact that I was on the 17th floor in a hotel, that it had something to do with the height. Um, and so, I continued to take the medication after that, thinking that maybe that was just the issue, is that I just took it too high, and that it was causing some sort of reaction to the medication. However, I realized after a while that I continued to take the medication, and I really didn't get any effect from it anymore. At this point, I felt that my anxiety was too overpowering, to the point where really it had no effect on me. And from that day forward, my anxiety was unbelievable. I don't feel that it's really ever been to that point in my life. And after that one initial panic attack, it it started all of my other anxiety issues. Um, so basically, that was how my first panic attack had happened. And I would definitely say, even to this day, that it was my most powerful panic attack. And I think that's because after having my initial panic attack, I really didn't know what to expect. I didn't know if I was going to ever have another one. And when I did actually eventually have another panic attack, it wasn't nearly as severe because I knew what was going on. I knew it was a panic attack, and I knew how to control it. Um, to an extent, and I wouldn't say I could completely control it, but I knew that at that point I wasn't going to die, which gave me a little bit of encouragement. I knew that I wasn't going to die, so it wasn't as bad, because the first time I felt that I was dying. So with that being said, I know it's not that much of an improvement, but at the same time, at least you know what's going on from that point forward. So yeah, basically that's how my first panic attack happened. I'll be leaving another video probably after this video, because I'm going to probably start making videos now that I've got a mic. And, I look forward to posting more videos. I was pretty excited about this video, even though it's 5:43 a.m. in the morning. I told myself I was going to make my first video today. I'm actually probably going to go out today for the first time in quite a few months. I might take a walk, or I might just go out, out in the front yard. I'm not sure, but I'll be recording it. So, yeah. Until next time.